The night everything shifted, I was standing at the kitchen counter brushing sawdust off my sleeves. I'd been in the garage fixing a loose hinge on a dollhouse roof, the kind of small job that makes a house feel steady. The clock on the stove said 6:40. The windows rattled when the door slammed. My wife stood in the doorway, coat still on, one hand on her purse strap. She pointed at me, her fingers stiff and polished, and said it evenly, almost rehearsed. "Our daughter needs her real father. We're spending Christmas with him." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just nodded once, like I was absorbing instructions at work. She added something else after that, quieter but sharper. A sentence about divorce, about choices. A week later, I would be standing in an airport I'd never planned to see again, holding a boarding pass with my name on it and a destination that still felt unreal. But that night, none of that had happened yet. It was a gray Tuesday in Elk River, Minnesota, the kind where the river smells like metal and everyone walks a little faster to get out of the cold. I'd worked a full shift at the manufacturing plant, stayed late to calm a motor that wouldn't stop humming, then stopped by the grocery store for milk and a rotisserie chicken. When I walked into the house, it smelled like cinnamon candles and artificial pine. The small tree by the window was already lit, colored lights blinking unevenly. That was Emma's doing. She was 9 and treated Christmas like a responsibility, not a holiday. She slid down the hallway in socked feet. "Did you fix it?" she asked. I held up the dollhouse. The roof didn't wobble anymore. She pressed on it with both hands, testing it seriously, then smiled. "I told Mom you always fix things." I said I tried. In the kitchen, Rachel stood at the stove stirring a pot she'd probably started before I got home. Her shoulders were high. I'd learned over the years that her mood lived there. I mentioned my bonus, nothing big, enough for the bike Emma had circled in the catalog. That's when she said we needed to talk. She turned off the burner and faced me. Lipstick perfect. Blouse I didn't recognize. She said she'd spoken to Mark, her ex-husband. He had a cabin up north. He wanted to make up for lost time. She needs her real dad in her life, Rachel said, like it was a fact everyone already agreed on. I reminded her about church, about the dinner at my sister's, about traditions Emma loved. She waved it off, called them habits, said Emma deserved something bigger, better. I told her I was the one who'd been here. Dentist appointments, school pickups, reading at night. She didn't deny it. "You're her stepfather," she said. "You knew that." From the living room, Emma called out asking about movie night. Rachel didn't answer. She was watching me, waiting for something louder than what I gave her. I thought about an email I'd been ignoring for months, a transfer offer, overseas. I declined it every time because Rachel didn't want to leave Minnesota, didn't want distance, didn't want change. I said okay. That surprised her. She accused me of being passive, spineless. I didn't respond. Emma chose the black and white Christmas movie. She fell asleep halfway through with her head on my shoulder. I carried her to bed, tucked her in, and stood there, listening to her breathe. Later, the house felt hollow. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my old laptop. The email was still there, flagged. I read it once, then again. Then I rested my hands on the keyboard and waited. I didn't send the reply right away. I sat there with the laptop open and the kitchen lights humming softly above me. The furnace kicked on. Somewhere in the walls, the ice maker clunked like it always did. Normal house noises, like nothing had changed. But something had. I typed a short message to the hiring manager overseas. Nothing emotional, just clear. If the role is still available, I'm accepting. I read it twice. Then I hit send. The little whoosh sound felt louder than it should have. Rachel never came back into the kitchen. I heard a drawer open upstairs, a closet door, her footsteps. Then the bedroom TV turned on, low, like she could drown the whole conversation in background noise. I didn't pack that night. I didn't leave a note. I just went to bed on my side of the mattress and stared at the ceiling until my eyes finally shut. Over the next few days, the house ran on routine. Emma got up for school, ate cereal, asked me about the dollhouse, asked if we were still doing movie night. Rachel moved around us like we were temporary furniture. She talked about the cabin trip like it was already settled law. On the morning of the 23rd, I watched from the front window while they loaded bags into Mark's truck. The air outside was sharp enough to sting through the glass. Emma turned once and waved at me with mittened fingers. Rachel didn't look back. The door closed. The engine started. The truck rolled down the street and disappeared behind the snowbanks. I stayed standing there for a full minute after they were gone. Not because I was frozen, because I didn't want to move until I knew what I was doing next. By the end of that week, my transfer paperwork was finalized. The company moved fast once I said yes, like they'd been waiting for me to stop hesitating. I told my supervisor at the plant. He didn't ask many questions. He just nodded, clapped me lightly on the shoulder and said, "Sometimes you've got to go where you're treated like you matter." I left Elk River on a weekday morning while the streets were still dark, the snow plows leaving dirty ridges along the curbs. I took one suitcase, my work boots, and the drawing Emma had made earlier that month, me and her holding hands next to a Christmas tree. I slid it into my laptop sleeve without thinking too hard about it. The flight felt like a long hallway I couldn't turn around in. When I landed in Osaka, the air was milder than Minnesota, but it had that damp winter chill that settles into your clothes. Lights everywhere. Neon reflected on wet sidewalks. People moving quickly, but not aggressively. Like the city had a rhythm and everyone knew the steps. My company put me in a small apartment near the plant. A narrow bed, a tiny kitchen with a 2-burner stove, a small table that wobbled if you leaned on it. From the window, I could see commuters with umbrellas walking past convenience stores that stayed bright all night. The first morning, a supervisor named Mr. Sato met me at the entrance and handed me safety gear. He was quiet, polite, steady. He didn't talk like he was trying to prove anything. He just showed me what he expected and let the work speak for itself. It felt strange how simple it was to be treated with basic respect. That first week, I checked my phone constantly, not because I expected Rachel to reach out. She could go silent for days when it suited her. That part I understood. But Emma. I kept waiting for something. A message. A picture. A quick question about the dollhouse. Nothing came. So I sent the first one. "Hey Em, I'm here. I miss you. I hope you're having fun." No reply. The next day, I sent a second. A little longer. I told her I'd mailed something small, just a charm I'd picked up in a shop near the station. A simple wooden animal on a red string, something she could keep in her pocket. Still nothing. One night after work, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the screen until it went dim. I set the phone face down and listened to the street noise outside. Footsteps, a distant train, a scooter passing, a soft rain that came and went. The guilt didn't show up as panic. It showed up as weight. I tried to tell myself I'd made a decision Rachel forced into my hands. I tried to tell myself Emma would understand later. But a child doesn't live in later. A child lives in what she's told right now. A younger coworker, Ken, asked me over ramen one Saturday why I kept checking my phone. I told him carefully that my family situation was complicated. He didn't pry. He just nodded like he'd heard complicated before. "Truth takes time," he said, "but it shows up." The following Tuesday, I came home tired and opened my laptop out of habit. I didn't even know what I was looking for. Maybe a distraction. Maybe noise. I clicked into Facebook, something I barely used anymore. At the top of my feed was a photo posted by someone back home. A snow-covered cabin. A bright red sweater I recognized. A man standing beside them that I also recognized. And in the middle of the frame, right between them, was Emma. I stared at the screen for a long time without scrolling. Then I leaned closer. At first, the picture didn't register as anything more than a holiday postcard. Snow on the roof, pine trees in the background, Rachel standing close to Mark, her hand resting lightly on his arm, the red sweater I'd bought her the year before. He was wearing a green Christmas sweater I recognized immediately. Mine. The one Emma used to say looked friendly. The caption was short, 2 heart emojis. Family Christmas. I felt something tighten, but I didn't react right away. I zoomed in instead, not on them, on Emma. She wasn't smiling, not the way she normally did. Her mouth was set like she'd been told to hold still. Her eyes weren't looking at the camera. That detail mattered. I closed the browser and sat back. The room was quiet except for a train passing somewhere in the distance. I waited for anger to show up. It didn't. What came instead was clarity. 2 days later, I was in the break room at the plant when Ken walked in holding his phone. He hesitated, then asked me if my last name was Miller. I said yes. He turned the screen toward me. A public legal notice from Sherburne County. Divorce filing. Petitioner, Rachel Miller. Reason listed in bold. Abandonment. The date was 3 days after I'd landed in Japan. I read it once, then again. The room didn't spin. My hands didn't shake. I just felt hollow, like something had been scooped out and replaced with air. She'd filed while I was still jet-lagged, while I was still waiting to hear from Emma. Ken didn't say much. He didn't need to. He just said, "Sometimes people move faster when they think no one's watching." That night, I opened my email and searched for everything. My travel confirmation, the transfer offer, the acceptance timestamp, the messages I'd sent Emma, the shipping receipt for the charm, delivered. 2 days earlier, no response. That told me enough. I didn't call Rachel. I didn't send a message asking what she thought she was doing. I didn't confront anyone. I opened a folder on my laptop and started organizing. Step 1 was simple. Documentation. I saved copies of every message I'd sent, screenshots, dates, times. I downloaded my employment contract and the internal transfer approval. I highlighted the line that stated the move was temporary and employer-sponsored. Step 2 was financial reality. I checked our joint account online. 2 failed withdrawal attempts, large amounts, both flagged and denied. She'd tried to move fast there too. Step 3 was silence. I stopped sending messages, not because I didn't care, but because I needed a clean timeline. Every unanswered message already said what it needed to say. A tracking notification came through that evening. The charm I'd mailed Emma had been delivered. Signed for. I sat on the edge of the bed and held my phone without unlocking it. If Rachel had taken it from the mailbox, and I was fairly sure she had, then Emma had never seen it. That wasn't an accident. That was a decision. The next morning, I booked a return flight. Not for confrontation, not for drama, for process. I landed back in Minnesota on a wind-burned morning when the air feels sharp enough to scrape your lungs. The airport was quiet. A few families in heavy coats. No one waiting for me, which was fine. I checked into a small room near town, clean, plain, temporary. That afternoon, I drove past the house once. I didn't stop. The wreath was still crooked on the door. The tree lights were still blinking in the window. I kept driving. My first real stop was the credit union. The teller recognized me immediately. She lowered her voice when she spoke. "She tried to pull everything," she said. "Got angry when we told her she couldn't." I nodded, asked for printouts. She slid them across the counter without comment. By the time I got back to the room, my folder was thick, organized, quiet. That night I took out Emma's drawing, the one from before Christmas, the 2 of us holding hands. I set it on the desk and looked at it longer than I should have. That was the moment I understood something clearly. I hadn't been erased by leaving. I was being erased on purpose, and that meant the next steps weren't emotional. They were procedural. I closed the folder, shut off the light, and waited. Waiting doesn't mean doing nothing. It means choosing the order. The next morning, I made coffee in the small room and laid everything out on the desk. Bank printouts on the left, emails in the center, legal notice on the right. I didn't rush. I read each page once, then again, like I was training myself to stay steady. Step 1 was confirmation. I called Emma's school and asked for the counselor. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't explain the situation in detail. I just asked how Emma was doing. There was a pause on the line before the counselor spoke. "She's been confused," she said. "She asked where you went." I asked what she'd been told. Another pause. Then, the truth. Rachel had said I chose work over her, that I left, that I didn't want to be involved anymore. I thanked the counselor for being honest. When the call ended, I sat still for a long moment. The guilt I'd been carrying finally had somewhere to go. It wasn't mine anymore. Step 2 was legal grounding. I didn't look for a big firm. I called Aaron Blake, a friend from high school who now worked out of a modest office behind a gas station. He met me during his lunch break, coffee in hand, tie loosened. He flipped through the folder without interrupting. Bank records, employment documents, filing dates. She moved too fast, he said finally, and she left tracks. I asked him what mattered most. Timeline, he said, and restraint. Don't contact her. Don't confront her. Let the court see contrast. Step 3 was presence. I filed a formal response that afternoon. Nothing emotional, just facts, attachments, dates, receipts. I requested to appear in person at the hearing. Aaron smiled slightly when I told him that. She's assuming you're still overseas, he said. That works. That night, I stayed in. I didn't drive past the house again. I didn't check social media. I washed my mug, straightened the desk, and went to bed early. Calm is easier when you're rested. 2 days later, I received the official hearing notice. The date was soon. Too soon for someone expecting no resistance. On the morning of the hearing, I wore my old brown work jacket, clean but familiar. I carried the binder under my arm and left my phone in the car. The courthouse was quiet in that small-town way. People waiting on benches, papers folded on laps, the sound of boots on tile. Aaron was already there. He stood when he saw me and gave a brief nod. No speeches, no reassurance, just readiness. Rachel wasn't in the hallway yet. We took our seats. I rested my hands on the binder and focused on my breathing. In through the nose, out slow. The door opened behind me, heels on tile. I didn't turn right away. I didn't need to. I felt the pause when she saw me, the kind that happens when a plan breaks in real time. When I finally looked back, Rachel was standing just inside the doorway, her expression fixed in something between confidence and surprise. Her attorney leaned in to whisper something, but she wasn't listening. She smiled tightly, loud enough for the benches nearby to hear. "Well," she said, "look who finally decided to show up." I didn't answer. I adjusted the binder slightly, centered it in front of me, and waited for the judge to enter. Silence, in that moment, wasn't avoidance. It was positioning. The judge entered without ceremony. A middle-aged woman with gray hair pulled back tight and reading glasses already in place. Everyone stood, everyone sat. She reviewed the file quietly for longer than most people expected. Pages turned, a pen tapped once. Then she looked up. "Mr. Miller," she said, glancing in my direction, "I see you're present. The petition suggested you had left the country indefinitely." "I did not," I said. My voice sounded steady, even to me. "I accepted a temporary work transfer after being told my presence was no longer wanted." Rachel's attorney started to speak, but the judge raised a hand. "Not yet." She looked back to me. "Go on." I didn't raise the binder. I didn't gesture. I just spoke plainly. I was informed my wife and Emma would be spending Christmas with her ex-husband. I was told Emma needed her real father. I was also told I could file for divorce if I didn't agree. There was a small movement on the benches behind us. Not noise, just attention shifting. I accepted a work transfer I had previously declined multiple times for the sake of the household. I continued. I remained in contact. I sent messages. I sent a gift. None reached the child. Rachel shook her head sharply. "That's not true." The judge looked at her. "You will have your turn." Aaron stood then, calm, deliberate. He handed forward copies of my employment contract, the email acceptance with timestamps, the delivery confirmation for the package, and the bank statements. "These documents show Mr. Miller's transfer was employer-sponsored and temporary," Aaron said. "They also show multiple attempted withdrawals from a joint account without authorization and a divorce filing citing abandonment 3 days after my client's departure." Rachel's face flushed. "He left. That's what matters." The judge's pen stopped moving. "Mrs. Miller," she said, "abandonment requires intent and absence without justification. These documents suggest neither." Rachel's attorney leaned in, whispered urgently. She waved him off. "He chose work over his family," she said loudly, "just like my first husband." The judge looked up again. "Is that so?" Rachel nodded. "Ask anyone." Aaron didn't rush. He turned slightly toward the back of the room. "Your Honor," he said. "There is someone here who can speak to that claim." A woman stood from the last bench, middle-aged, grocery store uniform, nervous but determined. She introduced herself simply, said she worked the register where Rachel shopped regularly. "She told people he ran off," the woman said he left her with everything. That never sounded right. Seeing him here confirms it. Rachel's jaw tightened. "She doesn't know anything about my marriage." The judge leaned back in her chair. "What I know," she said, "is that you filed abandonment quickly, attempted to move assets improperly, and restricted communication between a child and a parental figure without court approval." Rachel opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. "He's not her real father." The judge looked at me, then back at Rachel. "Sometimes," she said, "the parent who stays is the real one." The ruling came without drama. Temporary decision-making authority awarded to me. Financial actions frozen pending review. A guardian ad litem appointed. Communication interference ordered to stop immediately. The gavel struck once. Firm. Final. As people stood and gathered their things, I stayed seated for a moment, letting the room clear, letting the noise pass. That's when I heard it. "Dad?" I turned. Emma stood near the doorway with the school counselor beside her. Her eyes were red, but her face was open. She crossed the room quickly and wrapped her arms around my waist like she'd been holding that moment in. "I knew you didn't leave me," she whispered. I didn't say anything. I just held her and let the rest of the room disappear. The house felt different once the hearing was over. Not bigger, not smaller, just quieter in a way that made sense. Under the court's temporary order, I moved back in while the guardian completed her evaluation. Rachel took a suitcase and left without much said between us. No shouting, no final speeches, just the sound of drawers opening and closing, and the front door shutting once. Emma stayed with me every other night at first. The first evening she came back, she walked through the house slowly, like she was checking to see if it was still real. She ran her fingers along the wall by the hallway, peeked into the kitchen, then went straight to her room. The dollhouse was still on the shelf where I'd left it. She knelt in front of it and started moving the little wooden figures around. No commentary, just quiet rearranging. That night I made grilled cheese and tomato soup. She dipped the corners like she always did and declared it fancy. Afterward, she brushed her teeth, said goodnight, and went to bed without fuss. Around 2 in the morning, I felt the mattress shift. A small weight pressed against my side. She didn't say anything. She just wrapped one arm around my chest and breathed until she fell back asleep. I stayed still until morning. The guardian, Ms. Turner, arrived a few days later. Navy coat, clipboard, calm voice. She didn't treat the visit like an inspection, more like a conversation that happened to include the house. Where does Emma keep her schoolwork? Who takes her to appointments? How long has she called me Dad? Since she was 3, I said. Ms. Turner nodded and wrote something down. That nod carried more weight than most arguments ever had. At school, the counselor confirmed the same timeline. The blocked messages, the confusion, the way Emma had been trying to make sense of 2 versions of reality at once. Paper by paper, the story aligned. Rachel tried to push back through her attorney, claimed misunderstandings, emotional stress, miscommunication. But the dates didn't move, the records didn't change. When the follow-up review came, the conclusions were simple. No abandonment, financial misconduct documented, parental alienation concerns noted. Custody remained with me. Rachel was granted structured visitation, supervised at first, clear boundaries, clear expectations, no improvising. When she heard the terms, she didn't yell. She just went very still, like someone realizing the floor plan they memorized no longer applies. That afternoon, Emma and I stopped by the hardware store on the way home. She picked out a small paint set. I didn't ask why. At home, she sat at the kitchen table painting one of the old dollhouse figures. Brown jacket, a little gray in the hair, careful brush strokes. When she finished, she handed it to me. "That one's you," she said. I closed my fingers around it and nodded. Later that night, after she was asleep, I stood at the living room window and watched snow settle under the porch light. The quiet didn't feel temporary anymore. It felt earned. And for the first time in a long while, nothing else needed fixing. Life settled into something steady after that. Not perfect, just honest. Mornings became predictable again. Coffee brewing before sunrise. Emma padding into the kitchen in mismatched socks, the sound of the toaster popping like punctuation to the day. I walked her to the bus when the weather allowed. On colder mornings, we waved from the front window. I cleaned the house slowly, room by room. Not because it was dirty, but because order helps you breathe. I boxed up things that didn't belong to us anymore and stacked them neatly in the basement. No anger attached, just inventory. On quiet evenings, Emma worked at the kitchen table while I handled paperwork. Homework on her side, forms on mine, two kinds of responsibility sharing the same space. Sometimes she talked, sometimes she didn't. When she did, it was about ordinary things, a classmate, a book, a song stuck in her head. Once, while I was rinsing dishes, she asked very casually, "You're not going anywhere again, right?" I dried my hands, knelt beside her chair, and answered carefully, "No, I'm here." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to coloring. Rachel followed the court schedule. Some days were tense, some were quiet. I kept communication short and written. Times, dates, logistics only. Boundaries aren't punishment, they're structure. The Guardian closed her report a few weeks later. The language was plain. Consistent caregiving, emotional stability, best interests served. That was enough. One Saturday afternoon, Emma and I fixed the loose hinge on the front gate together. She held the screwdriver. I steadied the wood. When it swung properly again, she smiled like we'd solved something big. Later, while she was brushing her teeth, I rinsed my mug and set it upside down on the towel. Small routines like that started to feel meaningful again. That night, after she'd gone to bed, I sat on the couch and listened to the house settle, pipes clicking, wind moving through bare branches outside. The porch light casting the same soft glow it always had. I thought about how quiet strength doesn't look impressive from the outside. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't rush. It just shows up consistently until the truth has no competition left. Before turning in, I checked my email one last time. Among the usual messages was a short note from someone I barely knew, a coworker of a coworker. He'd heard what I'd been through, asked if I had advice, said he was in a situation that felt familiar. I didn't reply right away. I closed the laptop, turned off the light, and stood for a moment in the hallway, listening, making sure everything was where it should be. Some stories don't end with applause. They end with calm. And sometimes, that's exactly how you know you did it right. If this story felt familiar in any way, if you've ever been quietly pushed aside, or told you didn't count, or had to let the facts speak when emotions failed, you're not alone. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, I'd be glad to have you here. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It helps this small community grow. And if you're comfortable, leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from and what time it is right now. I read those more than you might think. 2 more stories will be coming up next. Ones a lot of people have been asking for, and I hope they meet you where you are. Thanks for listening.